wide open-minded friends. I'm Katie Cook. This is the Wide Open Wonders podcast. Whether you're listening or watching on YouTube, I'm just so glad that you are here, and I hope you'll help me spread the word. And please subscribe. It's absolutely free to do so. So welcome, welcome, welcome. I did not mean to go so long in between episodes, but 2020, need I say more? It's been a bit of a wacky year. But here we are today with a really, really interesting conversation with Cheryl Costa. Cheryl's an author, researcher, lecturer, podcaster, journalist extraordinaire, and she has a real passion for data. She really loves the numbers behind UFO sightings. She's a native New Yorker. She had her first UFO sighting with her family at the tender age of 12. She's a military veteran, a retired information security professional from the aerospace industry. And she went on to write the wildly popular UFO column New York Skies for the SyracuseNewTimes.com site. And if you look her up on Amazon, you'll find all kinds of things that she's written, from comedy, one-act scripts, to, of course, UFO material. In fact, she and her wife, Linda, published a book, UFO Sightings Desk Reference, United States of America, 2001 to 2015. And they are working on another massive project, a book. It's a huge undertaking. They're going to publish UFO sightings reports from every single county in the United States. I mean, that's huge. I don't think anyone's ever done that. And I'm sure when they're done, they're never going to want to do it again, because it's a really huge undertaking. But I'm so glad they're doing it. If you're into UFOs and if you want to know more about the data, where they're happening, if there's any kind of pattern behind these statistics, well, Cheryl's your girl. Hi, Cheryl Costa. How are you?
How you doing?
I'm good. I like that. You're on New York. How you doing?
How you doing? Yeah.
You got into this whole crazy world a long time ago. You actually had a UFO sighting really young.
When I was 12.
12 years old. What can you tell us what you saw?
It was a late August afternoon, 65-ish. We had just visited an uncle and aunt up in the farming area, about an hour out of town. And we were coming down off the hill. They were in on a dirt road. Corn was higher than the car. It was a wet year that year. And my mother had my father pull the car off the road. And since we were still on a hill, we're looking out into the western sky, clear blue sky, and parked out there like a rock was a silver ball. And to give you an idea, if you hold your arm out, look at your little fingernail, that's about how big it was out there. And of course, my mother said, well, it could be something the Air Force is doing. It could be a weather balloon. NASA was only 5 or 6 years old at that point, and she says, could be something NASA's doing. Could be people from another world.
She said that?
Yes.
Okay.
That was, fascinated the 12-year-old. So it was funny because we sat there and we talked about this for a minute. Of course, my brother and sister were toddlers, so it didn't matter. We got back on the road, got down to the bottom of the hill. Dad turned onto the state tar road, and I climbed up back into the big window of that big old Chevy Impala and watched it. Like, who are you guys? And when they decided to go, it was like we see with like starships gone. And that changed me. Well, 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds, that type of thing. Mom and dad are stupid, Well, Mom and I actually kind of bonded a little bit at that point. We started getting books from the library. She'd get books, I'd get books. And we kind of read them to each other, that type of thing. And that was the context. And when, like, Von Danigan's book came out, we had a copy of that. She dog-eared
The Chariots of the Gods.
Yeah, Chariots of the Gods. She dog-eared on the top. I dog-eared on the bottom. Yeah, our copy was destroyed, And so that was my flavor of it. And we watched for things. We never saw anything else. And let's see, 6 years later, I'm in Cam Ranh Bay, Vietnam. I'm an airman. It was Christmas Eve, 1971, rather. And a friend of mine and I decided for something to do, we were going to go to midnight mass tradition Christmas, even though I wasn't really a Catholic anymore. And we were walking down to the base chapel facing west, and we saw the streak going across the sky. And I said, that doesn't look like a jet. And it stopped. And my friend said, "Jets don't stop." And that couldn't have been a helicopter. And I said, you know, wouldn't surprise me if the thing starts dancing around like a fairy. Darn if it then, type of thing. And then
You're like, this is familiar.
two of us got to midnight mass. Our heads were not on midnight mass when we got there. Now, I was always well read on the topic. I've always considered myself a UFO bystander. And plus, I had a clearance. I was both in the Air Force and later I was in the Navy. And I had clearances in what I did. And so being like a member of MUFON or something like that was taboo. So I kept it to myself, just had an interest. In 1990, I was between apartments, had to go out of town on business for the company I work for, the corporation I work for. And I got hospitalized out of town. I came back, I didn't even have a house to go to or an apartment to go to. So a friend of mine says, "Hey, I'm taking care of my father. He's on chemo. And Eric, here's the keys, feed the cat, stay there as long as you like." So I did. I went over there. I thought I'd only be there about a month. I ended up being there about 6 months. He had no cable. But he had first edition hardbacks of every major UFO book that had been written to that point. Everything Stanton Friedman had written up to that point, that kind of thing, And I went to college. So I got very smart on the topic matter, but I really didn't do anything with it. Every now and then I'd get together with Joe and we'd talk. And
this is Joe that owned the house that
yes,
you were
and
getting
he
to
would
stay
point
in.
me at other books.
Right.
Okay. And that was the context of it. And then finally, 2012, I retired from Lockheed Martin after 32 years, and I was working for a newspaper in the technical department. I made the plates every night that went on the press to make the morning edition. And it was November 5th, 2012. And there was this little side road. Presses we just started that 700-ton Swiss press. All we had to do was wait 90 minutes, 2 hours for the run to be done. Okay. And it was rolling, and I looked on web, and I looked at CNN, see if anything was going on, and there was this little sidebar article said, UFOs have been declining since the 1980s. Maybe they were always just an urban legend. I said, that doesn't feel right. My God, that feels like misinformation. That can't be right.
Mm-hmm.
So for the first time in my life, I Googled UFO Reporting Center. And I dug down into the web a little bit, into their pages a little bit, and I found a page with year-end subtotals from going back. So I went to 1980 and just added them all up and started throwing them into a spreadsheet, and I did this little bar chart, and it went up like a rocket. And I'm looking at this chart over 20 years to press from 80 to present, and it was going up like this, parabolic increase, and going, what memo didn't the UFOs get? And it was silly. In the coming nights, as soon as the press got rolling, again, all I had to do was wait for the press to be done, and we all went home. Okay. And I started looking at some of these stories, accounts. And again, I had always, programmed like everybody else. There are really great sightings. People write books about them, and then everybody else has to be kooks and nuts, all that kind of thing. I started reading these UFO reports. Some of them were as much as a sentence or two. Some of them were a paragraph or a couple of paragraphs. Sometimes people wrote an essay. And the more and more of these things I read, the more I saw people just trying to get it off their chest. So I was finishing up an entertainment writing degree, late in life degree.
You've done a lot, but keep going.
Okay. And so I decided to take a few of those stories and punch them up because for news or even new entertainment news standards, a guy says, I was laying on the hood of my car with my wife and we were watching the stars and we saw this thing. Well, okay, you got to dress it up. Bob and Susie were laying on the hood of his 67 Chevy,
Yeah.
And I took these articles in, I pitched them to a bunch of different editors of smaller newspapers up there. And I got chased out of the office, laughed out of the office. What brand of tinfoil do you wear, Cheryl? And it was very degrading. And finally, I went over to this weekly newspaper, weekly. And my pitch was the online edition, because people were still trying to goose up their online editions. They hadn't quite, a lot of traditional papers were trying to do it, but they didn't know how to do it. And I went to them and I said, controversy sells newspapers, controversy will sell page views. Let me write this UFO column for you weekly. And we talked for about 30 minutes. And he had read a lot of the same books I had read from Joe's place. And he illustrated to me that he was clearly sympathetic. He said, I can't do this, but you can. So show me your articles. I showed him a couple of the articles. He said, okay, fine. We'll try you out for a month. And he had sort of this tone of like the Princess Bride movie, you know, the Red Pirate Robert says, Wesley, I'll most likely kill you in the morning kind of thing. And
Have
he
fun
said,
storming the castle.
I'll most likely take you out in about a month because, you know, and so don't get any big expectations. I said, fine. Thank you for the opportunity. About a month later, I get a phone call from him. He says, come on over, we need to talk. I said, that's it. It's over with. I get over there. I'm 10 minutes late for the meeting because the parking lot's all torn up. I finally get a parking place. I come into the meeting. He's talking to everybody at this big round board table and everything. I walk in. He stops, looks at me, points at me, and says, there's our rock star. I said, what do you mean? He said, he looks at all the rest of the columnists. He says, you're pulling more page views than everybody here.
Boom.
And I said, oh my gosh, just keep doing what you're doing.
You're like telling the truth. Okay.
Yeah, that too, you know. And of course, over the years, I evolved from just stories. I started adding up, you know, sightings in counties and things. And when we got around 2015, we had a county data, neither database, MUFON or NUFORC had, and NUFORC was the easiest to get my hands on, but they didn't have county data. And I even wrote a letter to Pete Davenport. I mean, nothing against Pete, but I said, you know, do you guys have county data submerged in the database? Could you display it up? He says, no, we don't collect that. If you want county data, stick a pin in the map, you know. And I'm thinking, my God, that's not something you can do if you're trying to do data work, you know. Yeah. So I downloaded some stuff and I did New York State. We didn't know what we were doing. Linda and I did not know. And we started adding county data to it. And suddenly we're sharing some of our charts with New York State investigators. And they're saying, we didn't know there was a cluster there because the county gave you another resolution. The rural area, it was like onesie twosies. When you put the county information to it, suddenly those places started to these places that had a handful of sightings that were not much more than cattle crossings with a general store that sold Haagen-Dazs and a volunteer fire department and maybe a trailer park. These sightings were starting to show patterns in rural areas. Okay. Wow, we didn't know about that, you know. So Linda and I, at the end of 2015, we said, wow, look at all the cool stuff we found. What if we did this for the whole country, she says. And we just sat there and stared at that chart for about another 10 minutes. I said, you know, it could take a year. It took 18 months. And that's how we produced the book, UFO Sightings Desk Reference, United States of America, 2001-2015. It had 121,000 sightings in it. And now
121,000 sightings.
Yes, between NUFORC and MUFON. It's about a 60-40, 70-30 relationship, MUFON being the smaller number. And currently we're up to 2018, and that's the last year we're going to do them. So right now we're carrying 146,801 sightings. That's the reported ones. It's a smidgen. I'll tell you why in a minute. So that's what we've got now. I did not know this. The paper went out of business 3 weeks ago, and it was the last posting on the online edition. Okay, and we all did kind of final articles and things. And last week, one of the editors told me, he says, you were carrying 80% of the page views. And I was blown away to hear that. I've had a Vancouver, British Columbia news outlet reach out to me. And I'm going to start publishing with them because, one, I have had censorship in the United States. So I've decided that I would like to publish with a foreign entity.
Do you have a handle on what gets censored and what? Is there a pattern?
We noticed it the first year I was writing. If I wrote an article Susie and her father went to the ice cream stand to get some frozen custard, and while they were waiting in line, they saw three bright silvery objects fly overhead, followed by Air Force fighter jets. If I mentioned the military, mentioned the Air Force, you Googled it, you couldn't find it on the day that it was published. You couldn't find it for over a week, if at all. But if you went strictly to Syracuse New Times paper, you would find the article. So we've known the NSA's had its fingers in Google for years. So I noticed this because people were saying, we can't find your articles. I said, go to the paper. Well, we always Google. I said, go directly to the paper. We went to the publisher and said, we've got like enemy action going here. Okay. And so that was the context of it.
Right.
That was when, in the meantime, what we ended up doing was a guy at UFO Digest up in Ontario. We told him, if on Friday you don't see my article up by 6 o'clock in the evening, go directly to the newspaper and see if it's there. If it's there, go ahead and make a copy and republish it on your site, which he did. And that kind of nixed. We stopped getting cut off after about a dozen articles got published in Canada because we couldn't see it here in the States.
All the other countries, it seems, are so much more laid back about this. Oh, okay, so two things. The numbers are still going up from what you can tell about sightings. Is this just more
shapes,
people?
The shapes have fallen off 40% in the last 5 years. The sighting numbers have fallen off. Okay. At a peak around 2011, 2012, 2013, it was up around 12,000 sightings a year. It has fallen off down to about 6,000 or 7,000.
Do you think that's just people reporting less, or do you really think
it's a little bit of each?
Okay.
It's partly that, but just because they've fallen off several thousand, they've fallen off by 40%. I think it's a cyclic thing personally.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because I've got the data in a perspective of looking at 7 to 10 year cyclic humps in the sightings. Okay, it's a common known phenomena, and you don't see it initially when you look at my charts, but it was because many people were coming online and discovering online reporting, so it kind of masked the fact that there was humps going on. Okay, up and down over a period of about a couple dozen years, or a dozen and a half years. So partly that, okay, and partly some people, just a younger crew doesn't. They tend to go on something like Facebook and tell their friends and tell people in their groups and things, but we can't count them if they're doing them there.
Right.
Okay, so that's a problem, and I've brought up the point to both reporting services. Guys, you need to start promoting your services. You need to get on an active advertising campaign, because if people aren't reporting them, then we can't measure it. And this is artificially small because I do a post about it on Facebook, and 20 people say, well, I wouldn't know where to report it if I did. Or I call my police department and they laugh at me on the phone. Well, write it to MUFON, give it to Nufor. We see the hump around 2011, 2012. Well, we were coming into the Mayan calendar year, and people were sensitive to that. Okay, so our Mayan calendar year, it peaked. Yeah. Everybody was outside looking up.
Sure.
And I think that was partially, again, artifact of cultural stimulation, because for a year on either side of that, people were running documentaries about the end of the world with the end of the Mayan calendar, all that. So,
do you also think the whole UFO thing has become so popular? I mean, now, especially young people now, they're like, oh yeah, aliens are real. I watch Ancient Aliens. I believe in it. That kind of thing. Maybe they see a craft with a couple of friends. They don't panic. They don't call the police. They don't call MUFON, because they're like, cool, I got to see one. I'm one of those people now. Whereas 20 years ago, people would be like, has anybody else seen something in the sky? I really need to report this. I need that corroboration, validation, whatever.
They used to call war nerds. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe now it's just more accepted, and there's just not the reason. There's not that urge to even report it, because maybe young people are like, well, everybody's seeing them now.
Well,
I don't know.
I would agree with you to some degree on that, because right now, 2 weeks ago, Linda and I threw a UFO town hall in Homer, New York. at a big art center they had there. It was a 200-year-old Baptist church that they converted into an art center. It seats like 400 people, and they had bands in there, they had plays in there, and all this kind of stuff. And we had done a presentation there last year, and it was well attended. So we put this up. We only did it like on a community bulletin boards. We didn't buy any radio spots or anything like that. We had 60 people show up. That's good, considering we did not really promote it.
Yeah.
And the idea was invite people to come up to a microphone or grab a wireless microphone and bare their soul about their sighting or their experience or event or something like this. And 1/3 of them did. We had 20 people, and by the end they
Really?
were fighting over the microphone. So that's the end of 90 minutes. That was
Yeah.
over 30%. And had we probably stayed there another half hour, we probably had upwards of 40%.
Can I ask you, were any of them abduction stories?
3 of them said that shared what was very clearly an experiencer thing. One woman, her dog and they heard a humming sound. The next thing they remembered, they're both in a fetal position on her cot in her tent the next morning. And then other stories were, the classic stuff. So yeah, I don't know if people are seeing less of it or again, we're still getting past that stigma stick we've had the last 50 years.
Yeah.
Wow, did you say that? No, and you
Neither
didn't
did you. Yeah.
That was the flavor of it. I did discover when I was writing my column that families, every now and then I'd get an invitation over to somebody's backyard barbecue. I'd go over there with a security guy to make sure it wasn't a lynch mob or something. I'd get over there and find out, yeah, it's really family barbecue, and somebody'd throw a beer and a burger in my hand, and that'd be it. And they'd say, hey, we want you to meet our Uncle Frank or our Aunt Susie. Frank flew in bombers in World War II. He saw Foo Fighters, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
One thing we discovered was, while people weren't reporting them or telling newspapers or something like this, they were handing them down as UFO stories down like family heirlooms. I had a woman come to me and share her family's been seeing them for 5 generations. I opened up, told my mother that story. I'm estranged from my family, but my mother and I we can't talk about anything else, but she'll still take a phone call with me if I'm talking about UFOs.
You bonded over that.
That's one thing we're still bonded on, but we don't agree on anything else. Okay. I'm considered a black sheep of the family for a number of reasons, partly because I'm a trans person, partly because I'm mystic, and partly, and to some degree, maybe because of the UFO stuff. It makes me too woo for a lot of people, the straight-laced ones in my family. Mom is still somewhat sympathetic to it.
She saw a UFO with you.
Yeah, we shared an experience together.
The woo-woo came to her.
The woo-woo came to her, yeah. So that, like I said, I still have a conversation. But that's when she opened up and told me the maternal side of our family has been sharing these stories since the 1880s. Some of my cousins who went nuts or went in the gutter because of drugs, it was because of their experiences.
This is why people need to communicate their experiences. They have got to be accepted.
Yes.
It's so painful to keep something that huge to yourself.
I'm going through hoops right now with I was trying to reach out to college professors up at a couple of universities that are near me, and I get crickets to my offer to come give them a rational presentation on the topic matter. Would you like to see my data? I have evidence. Most people don't have evidence. I have evidence. Would you please invite me up? I'm researcher of the year. I mean, I'm a smart person here, and crickets. I had a psych professor call me up. Well, we don't see how that would fit into our program. I says, people have to hold this stuff in. If they've been touched by the ETs, if they've seen something and everybody tells them not to tell anybody. So what does that mean? That equals closet. Well, I happen to be of a minor religious faith. I also happen to be gay. I know what a closet is, and I know the damage it can cause you. I said, if you people aren't sensitive enough to research something, this is a new, troubled group of people that need to have some compassion. They weren't interested. So a therapist friend of mine and I were talking about this, and he said, "Why don't you reach out to the LSCSW people up at one of the universities, the people who train the social workers and the
Right.
people who do that kind of counseling." So I did. I wrote a really. He said it was a brilliant letter. I wrote this great letter, went through it a dozen times to make sure it was right, and I sent it up there. And I made this argument. I says, "Look, I says you got people who see these things and can't tell anybody. The sailors on those radar ships with the Nimitz couldn't tell their families that their personal realities had been rattled,
Mhm.
and it almost cost them a marriage.
Yeah.
I know experiencers who almost lost or did lose their marriages because their spouse would wake up in the middle of the night, they weren't there, and they thought their spouse, the one who was being abducted, was having an affair, out having an
Yeah.
affair with
Oh, it's
somebody.
missing time.
Oh yeah,
Right.
right.
Yeah.
You know, who you're running around with.
Yeah.
What's her name? What's his name? You know, and I've heard this from a number of people. And so I brought this up to these social workers. For 2 weeks now, it's been crickets. But my therapist was CC'd on the note and on the letter, and he said, if we don't hear something in a month, I am going to raise hell through my professional channels. Please.
What I'm getting is that you don't wait for anybody else anymore. You don't
No,
wait for
I normally
closure,
don't.
you
I
know?
normally don't. But I'm trying. Linda, my spouse, who's the brains behind the book to begin with, okay, she's got the science degrees, not me. And she defined how we were going to do the book. She said, not going to be any cute aliens on the cover. We're going to do some science. We're going to do it like an epidemiology study and study clusters, distribution, frequency, shapes. And there's not going to be stories or anecdotals. Like everything else is always a story. We're going to publish data. In fact, I showed a couple sample pages to Stanton Friedman about 6 months before we published. I showed it, and he started flipping through the 6 or 7 pages I get. It was kind of laid out like a chapter, and he looked at it, and he stood up, waving the papers in the air. Somebody's finally publishing some data, you know. And it was very. I was very impressed. He was very kind to us. Gave us a really nice write up to promote the book. I miss the guy. I really do. And I used to do the show on Saturday night. It was called The X Factor. And I was I was a Buddhist nun doing the radio program. And my lama, local monks and nuns turned me into the lama. Oh, she's doing a radio program with all that silly stuff. And lama gets me aside and he says, "Does your audience know you're a Buddhist nun?" I said, "Well, I've been discreet and didn't say so. Tell them." I said, "Okay. It's okay to tell him?" He says, "Tell him. If Buddhas were alive, he'd be like Larry King. He'd have coast to coast radio program. No problem. You do it. Tell him you're a Buddhist. And let the Buddhism color the type of guests and the type of interviews you do." I said, "Fine, I can do that." I had his blessing, so I went ahead and do it. And this was the head of Tibetan Orthodox Buddhism in North America, so I got it right from the top. So I did that. From the standpoint of the consciousness aspect that nobody in the hardware community of UFOs wants to hear about, coming at it from the standpoint that I'm an ordained Buddhist yogi, I'm going to say, hey guys, the key to understanding ET is in the consciousness. You got to understand that we're connected to everything, everywhere, every when, and once you start getting that, then you'll understand that we are part of everybody. And they're just waiting for us to wake up and not think that we think we're the only game in town and that we're actually part of them. And that's what nobody wants to hear. Now, I normally didn't talk that kind of woo-woo talk. And then I was at the Ozark Mountain Festival.
I love it. In Eureka Springs. It's
and
wonderful.
Yeah, it's a great festival. This is in April. And I was talking, the guy who makes the UFO Hub recordings, Anand, and he overheard me and Ray Hernandez from the Free Foundation having a hell of a conversation in the cafeteria of this place, right? And just having a great conversation about things. And, everybody who's being touched by these off-world jokers, is coming back a mystic, because guys that were completely atheist or agnostic were coming back spiritual. People who are hellfire, brimstone, Bible thumpers are coming back non-dogmatic and spiritual. And we both came to the conclusion, almost said it in synchronicity, They're making us all into mystics. This is that connection. That's the agenda.
Well, I was talking to Lynn Kitai about this. I feel like after somebody has any kind of encounter, even just a sighting at a distance, once you know that truth, you can't undo that truth in yourself. It's going to
It
open
changes your
something.
reality. You either go into a hole or you grow with it.
And even start asking, well, why me? And then you have to look within. You have to. And your consciousness is going to expand. And I wonder if they're just letting us see it one by one.
I met a dozen people here this weekend who had some experience of some sort over the past year, went online, discovered there's a whole community of us, and had to come to this thing.
Yeah.
So that, yeah, I think they're waking us up on. If you read Whitley Strieber's book, he says millions of us have been touched. So sooner or later, with all the millions of us who have been touched that have sort of woken up to this, have been quiet, sooner or later we're going to hit a critical mass on this stuff, and it's got to all come out.
I wonder, in a way, if that really is disclosure. It's not the government telling us anything, it's us going, we don't need to be told. We've seen it.
Most people
We
I
feel
talk to
it.
now that know anything about this stuff, we said, we don't need disclosure. We know. KNOW. We know. We're not believers. We know.
Yeah.
And I've written several articles like that in that context. I never dreamed that people from another world would come here. And that 12-year-old got, wow.
Do you think they're interdimensional?
All of the above.
Yeah.
Dimension jumpers, time travelers, interstellar, intergalactic, who are they, where they come from? We don't know that. We don't need to know that to study the phenomenon. That's what we've been doing here. Nobody's at New York Times said nobody's ever published a book of statistics before. That's what impressed them. A New York Times reporter took this thing to his editor and dropped our 2.5-pound book on their table, and the book's got charts, graphs, and tables. It's got all the charm of a bank ledger. But he says, some old ladies in Syracuse did the science. And it's the first positive article they had done ever in 70 years.
Really?
And what we get 8 months later, the title of the article, people are seeing UFOs everywhere, and this book proves it. And it was published in Science Magazine in the New York Times.
So
That's the syndicated part of it. And 8 months later, we had the December 16th stuff. So we are and our closest people who know us feel that we help stimulate that because they woke up. And I had a talk with Ralph Blumenthal we had a library in our household, our old 100-year-old house. We sat there and ate scones and drank tea all afternoon until Linda got home from work. And then they talked for a couple of hours. And I said, Ralph, I'm on a small paper. No one's listening to me. I mean, I got a lot of readership, but no one's listening to me. It's going to take a major newspaper of record like the New York Times or the London Times or the LA Times or the Dallas Morning News to break this story and hold Congress, hold the military to account. And 8 months later, they did it. And if you told me 2 years ago that I would have mainstream magazines like Popular Science come to me, if you told me about the same time I had a political magazine from DC, I used to live in DC. I knew what these political government hill magazines were like. Call me up and ask me for some stats because now congressmen and senators are getting briefings by the Navy after Lou Alessandro's unidentified program ran. I would have wanted a case of whatever you were drinking. We're making progress, and the UFO community wants to drink from the fire hose, but we are making progress. We got to bring the rest of the culture up to our level.
Yeah, and I was saying earlier, I want to hear more about your emotional attachment. You are right. We still have to have the science, and thank you for spending so much time putting together the science, because for a lot of people, that's the only thing that they're going to pay attention to. You come at them with too much woo-woo, they're just going to be like, okay, put the tinfoil hat on. We have to have the science as well, for sure. But I like that you are that combination.
My resolution in our database goes state, county, and down to the city level. And when we published our book before we go state and county, we are now prepared to publish a book that would go down to the municipal level. Okay? So if people want to open it up like a phone book and find their town in there under their county, it will be possible. The problem is if we went to publish it the way we want to publish it, the book would not be 374 pages like the first book. It would be 4,700 pages.
Oh my God.
Okay, we've got the model. We've worked out several models, even played with font sizes. Okay, it'd be 4,700 pages. So what we're going to do, okay, this is Linda and Cheryl's magnum opus. We're going to build 50 individual state books. California is going to be upwards of 600 pages. Some of the smaller states will be as little as 50 pages. The average state, typical states, around 150 to 250, 300 pages. We're going to publish 50 individual state books. We're going to publish then also each of the 30 shapes. We're going to publish a separate book for each one of them, right down to the daily counts for each of the 18 years.
Do you have an army helping you do this?
No, we've built automation to do this. We built our own automation. Okay, so there's 80 books. Then we'll do about another 5 to 10 analysis books. All the rest of the stuff is charts and graphs and tables with a little bit of verbiage in the front and some charts and graphs to kind of give you the highlight summaries, but then we're going to actually publish the data, right? Any researcher should be able to pick this up and say, wow, this is what was going on in the first 18 years of the 20th century. And then what Linda and I are going to do is we will have 80 to 90 books all published about the same time. It will be the largest publication, largest compilation of UFO data ever published.
Ever. Anywhere.
Ever. And right now our book is the only statistics book ever. So this will be the largest compilation of published data. Oh, hey, media, you wanted evidence? Here it is. Go out with a bang.
Did you get a big grant to do all of this?
No.
Wow.
I'm retired. I'm on a pension. I got to have something to do.
Well,
I don't fish. I don't have grandchildren, and I don't play golf.
Well, this is your chance. Let's wrap this up with a serious plug for where people can find you, what you have going on, how they can get their hands on this.
Okay. If you want the book, the UFO Sightings Desk Reference, the first book, it's available to Amazon. Very easy. Don't ask for a signed copy. Here's why. It'll cost you a fortune to ship it to me. Okay? Here's what we tell people to do. Buy the copy from Amazon. You'll have it in 2 or 3 days. Okay? In the introduction, we did an FAQ instead of a regular introduction. There is a little email address in there, and it says if you email us your mailing address, we will send you a plate that is autographed by both of us. You peel off the back, it's a photograph of the two of us with our autographs, and you tack it in on the verso page and the book, and that's the titling page, and now you've got a signed copy.
That's genius.
In fact, you've got the libraries suggested that to us. So that's that book that can be had. If you want to hear me on talk radio, I'm on KCOR Digital Radio. It's called KCOR Digital Radio if you Google it. And KCORdigitalradio.com. And the name of the program is on Tuesdays. We're heard in 60 countries. And it's on Tuesdays, 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock Eastern Time, 11 to noon Pacific Time. And it's a good show, and it's all about metaphysical and consciousness and that type of thing.
This has been fascinating. I knew I wanted to talk to you. I thought we were going to get into some statistics, and you've completely blown my mind.
Well, let me give you a couple of quick statistics.
Okay.
The number 1 county in the United States is Los Angeles County, not the city, but the county. Okay, 3,919 for the last 18 years. Okay, the number that is more sightings in one county than 40 individual states. The number 2 county in the country is Maricopa County, Arizona, which is essentially the Phoenix area.
Right.
And they have the next set of numbers. Okay. And up until now, the number 1 city in the United States had been Las Vegas, even though the state was ranking number 25, and Clark County ranks in the top 30 counties of 3,142 counties. But this year, last few years, it's always been Vegas. George Knapp loved that, you know.
Yeah.
Okay. This year, Phoenix crept ahead by about 100 sightings, and so this year they're the number one city in the country for the number two county and the number one city for UFO sightings. And then it breaks down other places, but they're not necessarily where you think they are. Everybody thinks they're around our nuclear reactors. They're not. They think them around our military bases. Well, since the Cold War, most of our military bases are reserve Air Force bases, Army, National Guard, that kind of thing. Only the active bases where the advanced technology, Lou Elizondo will tell you that, have any kind of UFOs loitering around them, and that's mostly Navy bases. And of course, they still loiter around our missile sites out in Montana and Nebraska. I've looked at all 55 commercial nuclear reactors. I have their street addresses and county, and I ran the numbers against them, and it's negligible.
Okay.
There's more sightings around some brownfields and dead coal mines and dead gas fields than there are around our nuclear sites. They're more concerned about our pollution than they seem to be about some things.
It's fascinating. Thank you so much.
Anytime.